Welcome to Edison Open House Global Healthcare 2021. In this session, we're going to focus on the work of Exopharm. It's an Australian company dedicated to developing transformative medicines using exosomes. With me is their Chief Commercial Officer, Chris Baldwin. Chris, I think you better start by explaining, what are exosomes?
Exosomes, and thanks for having me here, Vivian. Exosomes are these very small nanoparticles that virtually every cell in nature produces. And the reason that cells use these exosomes is, and the way that they pass, is to pass material from one cell to another. So in order for cells in a bigger organism to coordinate their activities, to grow, to behave similarly, to fix themselves if something happens, they have to communicate. And the communication mechanism is this little nanoparticle called an exosome. There's another name for them, extracellular vesicles, which is actually more difficult still. So we like to refer to them as EVs. But EVs will be put out by the producer cell and taken up by the recipient cell. Once they get into the recipient cell, they're passing either proteins or RNA or a variety of other materials, enzymes, what have you, from cell to cell. And in doing so, they're enabling the body to work together and to build new tissue.
So they're kind of nano-sized cargo trucks passing from one place to another with some really great goodies that are very important in healing and all sorts of other processes. So why was Exopharm formed, and how are these exosomes or EVs useful in medicine?
So Exopharm was formed by my CEO, Dr. Ian Dixon. Ian was in the regenerative medicine space working with cell therapies for many, many years. And what became apparent really in the around 2010, 2012, was that the way that cells worked when they were a stem cell transplant occurred was that they released exosomes and trained the body that received them to do different things. They didn't reproduce, they didn't create a sort of cellular patch. They were actually training the old cell to do new activity. And so the idea began to strike people. Why are we transplanting cells when what we really want are the exosomes that cause the cells that are already there to do different things? Ian looked at that and said, that's going to be a successful way to make medicines in the future. How are we going to manufacture them? The tricky thing about exosomes are that they're these very structured particles. Like you said, they're nanoparticles. So they're maybe 50 nanometers to 200 nanometers wide. They're tiny. And they're very fragile. There's a bilipid membrane on the outside. So it's almost like a liquid soap bubble of minuscule proportion. So how are we going to take those out of either blood or a cell media in order to concentrate it and turn it into a medicine? And that was the challenge that he put to himself and his colleagues when they first created something that we call the LEAP technology.
And the LEAP technology is something that you can use to essentially manufacture exosomes or EVs to your requirements.
That's right. And, you know, cells are the true manufacturers for us. But once those exosomes have been released from cells, how do you actually collect them, aggregate them, purify them, concentrate them into a way that they can be used for medicine? What LEAP is an affinity chromatography technique that's already in use with bioprocessing with a whole number of fields. So these are resins and columns and processes that industry is used to working with at massive scale. What Ian was able to do with his founders was to take that and use it and tune it slightly in order to use it to purify exosomes. So then we suddenly had this ability to create piles and piles of exosomes from any biomaterial. So whether it was orange juice or milk or blood or stem cell cultured cell media, we could take those exosomes out of that and purify it away from anything that we didn't want.
So where did you see your first application of these exosomes?
The first application for us is really in the regenerative medicine space. So it's really taking cells that we as a medical community are very, very comfortable in using with very sick patients. And the reason for that is because it's such a novel technology. There has been no exosome medicine approved in any market anywhere in the world yet. So we wanted to start with something that was very well understood to be safe and effective and would not cause any regulatory concerns as a source material. And what we chose were platelets. Human platelets are used with cancer patients around the world every day. Millions and millions of doses of human platelets are transfused safely with very, very sick patients. So what we did was we took platelets and extracted the exosomes that they create, purified them into something that we call Plexaris. And what that does is create something that has a lot of the regenerative, the healing powers, the wound healing powers that we would find in a platelet transfusion, but in a hyper concentrated dose. That's the first product that we produced. It's the first product that was ever transfused into a human being anywhere in the world, and that happened last year here at Exopharm.
And of course, wound healing is a huge potential market. Wound healing, I mean, people think of a gash on the legs, but actually it's really the chronic wounds, the diabetic ulcers. Right. It's all those kind of things that you want to deal with, the bed sores, things like that. So you've started a trial. Tell me a bit more about that and how that has gone.
Great, thanks. Yeah. So our first trial was dosed in around this time last year, which very quickly turned into the coronavirus outbreak. We had to shut that trial down because it was relying on autologous platelets, which are platelets that a patient might donate to themselves. That was not our commercial intent, but from a safety perspective, even doing those first couple of patients was really important for that. But logistically, it's a nightmare. So we went to what's called allogeneic. So patient A donates platelets, or donor A donates to recipient B. So those are the platelets that we ended up trying. We've just finished something that we call Plexaval-2 for wound healing. It's almost entirely a safety study. We're looking for very little readout right now as far as the efficacy around wound healing. And the reason for that is that not only are we validating the safety of the platelet product, because we know that the feedstock is so safe, what we're really doing is validating the safety of our process. And we're demonstrating our scalability and capability to do that and do it in a regulatorily acceptable fashion.
And I guess in some ways that actually going from to a kind of off-the-shelf model, as it were, might be a very important step. So coronavirus might have done you a favor in that sense.
Absolutely. It's where we wanted to go anyway. The idea that you would take it, the whole ambition around exosome medicines is to be off the shelf. If you look at a mesenchymal stem cell therapy, what you'll find is that when they say off the shelf, what they mean is that one dose could be used in multiple different patients. It doesn't have to necessarily be matched, but it's not actually carried off on a shelf. It's not in a pharmacy. It's down deep in a -80 freezer. And there's a whole process of taking those cells out because they're living medicine. We have to take them out. We have to thaw them out. We have to take the antifreeze that they're stored in, which is actually toxic, wash it out, make sure that the cells are only there, and then put those in. That is a labor and a process that the medical community is frankly not very comfortable with, and it creates an incredible barrier, a commercial barrier, to widespread use, which is also why when you look at the treatments that the MSC companies will go after, they're very acute, very localized, high impact sort of facilities. We want to take exosomes, basically make MSCs useful through exosomes, which we think are truly off the shelf. They can sit on the pharmacy shelf in their fridge, and widen out the application, because the regeneration, like you said, wound healing is a very large market. Other markets that have interest to us would be things like osteoarthritis or hearing loss. These again are very, very, very large markets that we would not want to have a drug that was incredibly expensive to transport and administer.
Are there many competitors in this field?
I would in some ways say that there are zero competitors in this field, because what's happened is that as exosomes have begun to develop, we've seen a number of companies start to champion their use and do the work, parallel work with us. So two of the major companies that are in the same field, one is in the UK, they're in Oxford, called Evox. It's privately held. And then there's a publicly traded company in Boston in the US called Kodiak. And Evox and Kodiak have both traveled the path from, we believe exosomes are going to be useful in this particular area, and we're going to show that, and we're going to do it first in vitro, then we're going to move to animals, and now we're starting to move into humans. We're basically on a very similar trajectory with them, but we're kind of starting from the other side, saying, if we find a use for exosomes, we're going to be able to make hundreds of thousands of doses of this stuff very straightforwardly. And now we're working back to specific indications. So you can imagine that, and because this technology, and we're now moving in from the what I'd call naive exosomes, so the ones that are produced by single cells, into something that Evox, Kodiak, and us would call engineered exosomes, or EEVs. And the potential for using those is so broad. There's plenty of room for pretty much everybody to play right now.
What should investors look out for over the next 6 to 12 months?
So first of all, I would encourage everybody to really try and get their heads around what exosome medicines look like in the future. Pay attention to what we do, because we're a publicly traded company. There's a lot of information that we need to put out anyway, and so we promote ourselves in a way that somebody who's covered in VC isn't going to be able to provide necessarily. Now Kodiak in the States, they're also publicly traded, so a lot of information is coming out about what they're doing. They're in clinical trials, we're in clinical trials. So there's more information probably about exosome medicine that's come out in the last 6 months than had come out in the last 6 years before that. So it's a really good time to really start to understand what the possibilities are for exosome therapeutics as a whole and as an industry. And as I mentioned, because there's so many different areas that we might be applying exosome medicines to, this is a great opportunity to really leverage from point to point your knowledge base around what it's achieving. So if we achieve something, I fully expect that somebody following a Kodiak stock might be very interested in that result and can use it as a proxy for their success. So that's the first thing. I'd really look at the industries itself, because it's a fascinating area. And then the second point would be to look at our progress as Exopharm. The two things that we're really working on this year are, number one, demonstrating our scalability and our capability at the GMP scale. So when we do a clinical trial, we're showing not only that we can, the power and the potential of exosome medicine, but also our capabilities as a company to deliver a GMP process for all exosomes. The second one is making deals with pharmaceutical companies. These engineered EVs are ideal for partnerships with pharma companies doing drug development. And if you look at both Kodiak and Evox, the other in the UK there, they've done multiple deals with pharma companies around specific indications. So both of them have done a multiple set of indications with CNS. Evox has done rare diseases. Kodiak has done cancer. So you can see we're covering all sorts of space. But the reason why pharma companies are really interested is because the exosome in the engineered exosome space is this kind of super delivery vehicle. So it is solving drug delivery problems that have plagued pharma for many, many years. They've tried a few things. One of them is called lipid nanoparticles, or LNPs, which is what is bringing the mRNA virus COVID treatments to the market today. And they work okay, but they aren't actually designed by nature to go from cell to cell. And the body ultimately starts to reject those types of artificial sacs. When you have an exosome, though, you're actually getting the body to take that material in. So it's working to benefit or serve as an adjuvant to the treatment rather than as an impediment.
What about your cash runway?
So like any small company, that's probably the most important number that we keep an eye on. And our goal is to make ourselves available. So we're always at least 9 to 12 months ahead in terms of making sure we've got plenty of room to do deals and also to raise capital when we need to. The reality for us is that because the patent areas that we've gone after, especially the sleep technology, and then we have 2 other technologies as well, but LEAP is so general that we're never going to be able to make full use of it, which means that we're very interested in partnering that to bring in some early revenue, to fund our own clinical ambitions, our own drug discovery and development ambitions. So unlike a company that was purely dedicated to, creating clinical grade materials and products for themselves and assets in that respect, we have a funding mechanism, we believe, that will start to kick in, we're hoping, in the next 6 to 12 months ourselves. So that will change our runway perspective. That may not mean that we can survive without ever raising capital again, but it will certainly give us a pathway that a lot of companies in our shoes would be very grateful to have.
Chris, you've mentioned that 2020 was difficult for you because COVID kind of wrecked your plans, but although it also has shown you a way to the future, how are you looking at 2021?
Well, 2021 for us is, we've kind of coined the term the year we leap. Of course, it's a play on our LEAP technology, but it's really trying to capture the changes that are going on in the company and how we foresee ourselves changing over the course of 2021. This time last year, we had 21 employees. Now we have 42. I expect in another 12 months, we may double it again. So far, we've been exclusively based in Melbourne, Australia, but we're currently in the process of establishing the Exopharm Europe branch in Switzerland. We already have one staff there. We'll have a second staff there soon. And so what we're doing is really creating the conduit so that we can bring our technology to Europe, to all the big pharma companies that are located in Basel and the surrounds, and really across the EU and the UK. So that's a big leap for us as well, right? From the local to the global. And then, one of the things that we're talking about internally from a management perspective is moving from the idea of input measurements to output measurements. When you're small and you're starting, you're really looking for what are you bringing in? Who's the resource that we're bringing in? What's the asset or the IP that we're in licensing? And saying that's a measure of success. Well, that's been true for us for the first couple of years of our existence as a publicly traded company. But today we're moving to outputs, which means that we're going to really be able to measure ourselves as what have we achieved? What clinical trials have we succeeded with? What kind of deals have we made? So we're incredibly excited about 2021. Of course, it doesn't hurt that we're in Australia. The sun is shining. It's the middle of our summertime. We're thankfully not in the thick of the lockdown right now. So obviously, we're in a very good set of spirits.
Well, we're deeply envious. But thank you for that. It's an absolutely fascinating area, and thank you for explaining it so eloquently. Chris Baldwin, thank you very much.
Thank you, Vivian.